Naga?
It's Naga.
Okay, Naga. As Naga has briefly, but in a brilliant way, introduced mixed method research is all about combining, let's say, the quantitative and qualitative strand of research within is that mixed method is a specific methodological approach within its own specific worldview, vocabulary, and techniques. Of course, I do not pretend to be able to, especially with sharing some examples, with some of them coming from my research and some other from other papers. So at the end of the speech, I will be sharing with you some reference, mostly one of the main books to which you can refer to if you do want to go deeper in understanding how to use them, and other sources. Having said this, I would tend to say that the reason why mixed method has started to be appearing in academic research is basically because the two strands of research, when considered separately, they own shortcomings. So basically, when we think about qualitative research, the main shortcoming is that they are subject to personal interpretation by the researcher. So if you discuss about in-depth interview and then you run a content analysis about the narratives, it is quite obvious that there is the likelihood for the researcher to interpret the data. And then, further than this, we have difficulties in generalizing what we have discovered through qualitative research. Of course, on the opposite side, the main advantage is the rich amount of information and the deep amount of information that we can gain to understand better the behaviors of individuals, being them managers or consumers or tourists or travelers, visitors or whatever. But we suffer these two main shortcomings. On the opposite side, quantitative research has the advantage of allowing generalization, especially when we work properly with sampling. But on the opposite side, we suffer the deep ability to understand the content, the context and the setting of the research. Maybe we discover nice statistics, but those statistics are not able to allow us to be fully inside the cultural influence that could have shaped the behaviors we are trying to investigate. And then let's say that by definition, quantitative methods hardly listen the real voice of participants. So given that we are mostly positivists in searching for testing hypotheses, we are not such good in understanding the real voice of participants, also because the most part of the time we force them to provide answer on leak scales or multiple choice questions, and thus losing the possibility to gain broader information. And then we could find it difficult to understand what is behind the quantitative findings. Why certain paths that the statistics we use it exist? Which are the factors, the reason why certain paths are significant and some other are not? So said in other words, I'm sure that all of us share this feeling. When we have good statistics and we are trying to make our conclusion, we tend to rely as much as possible on previous studies, and we tend sometimes also to speculate on personal interpretation to explain why certain things have occurred in our statistics. And then this could be also when we try to shape the implications. So when we are in a need to tell the industry or policy makers or destination marketers what our findings are suggesting them to do. And we are asked to provide detailed information about what and how it should be done in light of the findings. So as you can see, each method, when taken separately, has advantages, but also shortcomings. So basically, the idea of using a mixed method approach occurred to overcome all these problems together. And the main reason why mixed method emerged, I really like to talk about this point, is both driven by the academy and driven by management. On one side, purely quantitative research started to realize that they could have problems in interpreting their quantitative findings, and on the opposite side, qualitative researchers usually at the end of a paper tend to feel unsatisfied about the impossibility to convince the reader that there is no option to do that their findings can be broadened to the overall population. But further than this, there are also other reasons why this methodology emerged, and it comes mostly from an industry-driven point of view. I'm very sensitive to this point. So I do super love to make research that is relevant from the theory and for the academia. I'm just trying to do my best as each of us, but I'm also really interested in delivering findings that can support the decision-making of practitioners. And usually when you talk with practitioners, they are interested in multiple forms of evidences and information that can better inform their real decision-making, how their business should be managed, which kind of decision they should take to fix their problems. So this is to say that in the last few years, mixed method research has gained attention. And the best way to convince you about this is that we also have, I'm not involved at all in this journal, so I'm just sharing this information. We also have this journal in the academia. I don't know how many of you were aware about this. Journal of Mixed Methods Research that is currently publishing papers that are adopting mixed method regardless the discipline in where they apply their studies. And it is quite well established, as you can see also by the impact factor, even if I'm not such a lover of this kind of methods. Just to keep talking why the mixed methods are relevant, this is a brief slide that helps us to understand. And as you can see in two different articles related to different topics, we see that in a very easy manner that the most part of research is quantitative driven or qualitative, with very few papers adopting a mixed method research approach, which is also nice when we start to think about how we can make original our study, because if we use a method that is not such widely used in the existing literature, maybe this is already a way to provide originality to our manuscript from a methodological point of view. Quite recently, some papers analyzing how mixed method has been applied in tourism research started to appear. So in this case, you can see one paper written down by the co-editor-in-chief in Journal of Sustainable Tourism that is analyzing how mixed methods are currently used in a time span that go from 2005 to 2014. And what they discover is that there are not so many papers using this method, and the most part of them are using the specific type of this kind of mixed method. We will see them in a while. Again, yet, as a way to convince us, included that maybe this methodology is gaining really attention in the existing literature. In the last few years, some hopeful papers started to appear in tourist and non-tourist related journals. In here, you can see special issues around the innovative mixed and multi-method approaches to hospitality and tourism research that is recently published in International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management. So basically, by these few slides, what we have said is that mixed methods are starting for sure to gain attention, both for academic and managerial reasons. But please be aware that not all the situations or all the research projects deserve or merit to be conducted by using a mixed method approach. Having all this said, what I would like to do in the remaining part of the speech, so considering that some of you could tell me exactly how many times I missed, considering that we were starting a little bit on late for my technical problems, it would be nice if you tried it. So basically, what I would like to do today is just to describe the main types of mixed method approaches. And their names are mentioned in this slide. So we can adopt an exploratory sequential design, a convergent parallel design, and an explanatory sequential design. So as probably the semantic of the labeling is evoking, let's go to see how each of them works, also by sharing the examples. So from a theoretical point of view, I would tend to say that the exploratory sequential design means that you combine qualitative and quantitative, because this is given for granted, that given that we talk about mixed method approaches. And given that it is a sequential approach, it means that one strand is preceding the other one. And given that we want to explore something, usually what we need to explore, we tend to rely on qualitative data, because they allow us to go deeper in knowing things that sometimes are not such very well known. So as the picture in front of your eyes on the screen is somehow evoking, exploratory sequential design means that we have first a qualitative strand of research that is done to collect data from a qualitative point of view. Then you analyze the qualitative data, and the findings from this strand of research is used combined with existing scales or measure from the existing literature to inform the survey instrument that you will be using for the second quantitative strand of research. And then at the end of this process, you will be delivering to the reader the findings of the overall project. So basically we have two distinct and interactive phases, with qualitative one preceding the quantitative one, and the quantitative one are developed by using a survey instrument that at least in part is developed through using the output of qualitative study. So this is in theory. There is nothing difficult to be understood, and I do not want to go in any information related to the many different types of qualitative methods or quantitative methods that we could use in each strand of research. We are just now talking about how they can be combined, giving rise to a mixed method approach. So let's now see in practice how these kind of methods can work and in which circumstances. In this paper that was published in Journal of Quality Assurance and in Hospitality and Tourism, me and some co-authors were interested in understanding the attitude toward responsible tourism and behavioral change to practice this kind of tourism in Italy. And at that time, I can still remember, it was quite a long time ago, when I was starting to approach the idea of running a quantitative study, because at the time I was mostly quantitative in nature, I was suffering the ability to identify scales and items to be used. So I decided to conduct a series of in-depth interviews with Italian consumers to understand what for them is responsible tourism. Then I was analyzing the content of these narratives that were fully transcribed. And then from this coding, I was creating items and statements that were complemented with existing scales that were used in other studies that at the time were quite limited and developed in other countries. And then I was using a factor cluster analysis to profile Italians related to their behavioral change. In this case, it's not me writing the paper. It's a quite recent paper being published in Journal of Travel Research. And in this paper, the authors were using a mixed method approach, again, an exploratory one. So the qualitative one was preceding the quantitative one, with the aim of studying this concept, which is the situated late knowledge travel behavior, which means the fact that we cannot develop attitude toward a destination without knowing it. So mostly it is shaped by the many different service encounters that we have while staying at the destination. In order to conduct the quantitative studies, the authors were first conducting a qualitative one, and then were using the findings to inform the survey instrument to collect data from a large sample to be used to conduct quantitative analysis. And through this, they were delivering the findings. In this case, again, it is a quite recent paper that I got published with some of my co-authors and PhD students, and it was about the motivation driving people to use Airbnb. In this case, I was thinking to use a mixed method approach, not just because at that time we had not research on motivation to use Airbnb. We had, for example, the paper for those among you that are currently working on Airbnb. Untitled paper was already published, and a few others. The problem was that the most part of them were published interviewing people belonging to a certain cultural context. And Italy is totally different from the US, the Netherlands, and for sure from Asia. And as you know, cultural differences matter when we study tourist behavior. So in order to be sure that the existing scales could fit with the cultural context in where we were interested in applying our research, we thought to conduct a qualitative study to realize through the voice of participants if Italians has a different kind of motivation to use Airbnb. And not surprisingly, we discovered that they have. So they are really driven by experience, let's say, needs. And then, of course, they share and they keep on sharing motivation with other tourists from other countries. If we would have not conducted knowledge that the cultural context in Italy that exert on shaping a certain set of motivation for Italians to decide to use Airbnb platform. And then we were developing a survey instrument in where we were pulling together the items that Tag and other authors suggested to use to measure motivation to use Airbnb, and we were adding few items that were obtained by the content analysis on our narratives with clients. Okay. In this case, this paper was and it was sorry, I forgot to put the name of all the authors. It's me, Martina Gallarza, Maurice Holbrook, and Francisca Arteaga from Spain. So in this case, what we were trying to apply was to empirically test a theoretical model that Holbrook has developed to address the experiential approach. And to do this, we were partially adapting some scales from non-tourism and hotel sector to the tourism and hotel sector by complementing the scales by using the findings of a series of in-depth interviews with consumers and a couple of focus groups with managers, so that our scales were able to fully represent how the experiential values that consumers can gain when staying at an hotel would effectively represent the sector we were interested in applying our research. So first, qualitative approach, the findings were used to be complemented by existing scales to develop a survey instrument. We were collecting data, and then we were applying structural equation model. Okay. This is another quite recent paper, again with some co-authors and PhD students, and it is again on Airbnb. In this case, we were interested in digging our knowledge about the reason for people in not using Airbnb. At that time, the existing research was very few. We had, by doing an extensive literature review, just 2 papers. One was contextualized in UK and one was in the US. So when we were approaching the idea of getting deeper in understanding the knowledge about this research area, we again decided to conduct a series of in-depth interviews with Italians to understand again if the Italian context could have shaped different reasons for consumers being prevented in using Airbnb. And indeed, we discovered completely different items when compared to the US and the UK. And then we were using this information to shape a survey instrument, to collect data from a sample of Italians, to profile them accordingly. And then we were, delivering the final findings to the reader. And the paper was published in International Journal of Hospitality Management. Another piece of paper, definitely pandemic time, we are somehow still living in. And at that time, the reason why we decided to conduct an exploratory sequential design was because all of us as researchers, we were facing a completely new reality. We were completely unknowing what was going on. So how I could have found the items and scales to measure a phenomenon that was mostly unknown to that point. So what we did was to conduct, again, qualitative in-depth interview with Italians to ask them what were the hotel selection criteria in pandemic time, and we were discovering what they were counting as being important when selecting the hotel. We were analyzing all the narratives from the in-depth interview. We developed the survey instrument and then collected data from almost 5,000 consumers across different regions in Italy, and we were applying a factor cluster analysis to understand which factors were driving their choices and if socio-demographics and typographic characteristics are able to exert a significant influence on the way consumers behave. So, just summarizing from the practice of what I have done into the theory, what I would tend to say is that we could choose to conduct an exploratory sequential design whenever we face one or a combination of the situation that you can see in the bulletin point. So basically, when you face a situation where measures or the instrument to investigate the research topic are not available, so you are not aware about what to ask, or when you identify new research questions based on the qualitative results, and then you cannot answer them by using qualitative questions. What I forget to tell you, and this is the right moment to do it, is that sometimes mixed method can be planned from the very beginning, so you consciously plan to adopt a mixed method approach, or they could emerge during the research part. And this could be a case. So you have started to think about the qualitative study, you conduct the analysis, and you struggle in understanding how to use the data because you discover something new. So you start to think about the possibility to conduct a quantitative study that can further enrich the conclusion that you are obtaining from the qualitative studies to be fully
dialihkan karena galon mungkin.
the mixed method is emerging, we say, okay? And then when there is a need to check whether existing scales and theoretical constructs work in a different cultural context or service setting. Think about motivation that drives people in the US in using Airbnb, and think about the same topic in Italy. Italians are definitely more individualistic, so they are more skeptical in general toward others.
Skeptical.
This is what Osfede is suggesting to us with the cultural values, and this should suggest you that probably, given that you are now focusing studies in Italy, and Italy is very different from Asia or US or whatever, it is not wise to simply automatically use existing scales that has been used in other countries with a totally different culture. Or at the moment, I'm conducting a research on shopper experience management in retailers, in airports, and we do not the airports is totally different from any other type of thing. So this means that probably the most part of the theories does not necessarily work in this specific sector. And indeed, in this research project, what I have decided to do was, again, to conduct in-depth interview about the stressors in airport when making shopping. And we discovered that new stressors come into action when people would like to make shopping at the airport. And these stressors are so based on the research project on which you are working on, you could face one of these situations, and this should suggest you to use this kind of methodology. Then the next one is the convergent parallel design. So we have again qualitative and quantitative. They are conducted in parallel, and their findings are used to compare, relate, and contrast the two kind of research and related findings in order to discover any research that is theory from another one. The two strands of research, the both of them are identifying the other one in terms of analysis. Again, if I do want to use the same style, this is a paper in where I used convergent parallel design. This paper was co-authored with Antonia Correja and Matthew Kozak, and we were interested in digging our knowledge about the meaning of luxury on tours. And when we started this research project, we discovered that the most part of the time research on luxury tourism is purely quantitative, generalizing things, or qualitative, thus having deep knowledge. The problem was that the most part of them, no study existed combining the two strands of research, thus giving the academia and the practitioners a definitely richer understanding about the meanings of this kind of tourism. So what we did was to use this kind of methodology, a specific variant that consists in a simple thing. When you conduct the quantitative data collection, you also include open-ended questions in the survey. And then you use the quantitative part to run structural question modeling, as we did in this paper. and the narratives from the open-ended question is subject to a purely qualitative-driven analysis. In this case, we were applying content analysis to the almost 400 narratives to discover the extent to which the narratives that are richer in information and data can confirm, disconfirm, or add something to what we usually measure by using item and scale. In this case, I was conducting the research in time of pandemic time, and I would tend to say that I was struggling with several problems. The first one was not knowing what I could have asked to hoteliers. And I had no time to conduct in-depth interview, to be honest, because this was an industry-driven project. So I was asked to provide them with fast reply. So a right compromise that I felt to be effective was to conduct a survey by allowing people to reply to an open-ended question that could also have the ability to acknowledge the ongoing attitude and activities that hoteliers would have put in action as soon as their understanding about the effect of COVID pandemic over their business could be more clear. Because at the beginning, my wife is an hotel manager and owner. She was completely struggling in understanding what to do to face this situation. As soon as the situation was getting clearer and clearer because of the information that we were provided, of course, even the businesses were understanding. So, said in other words, we were using this kind of methodology to be able to update while ongoing with collecting data, the extremely turbulent and dynamic context we were interested in understanding. The same reason was pushing us to conduct the same type of methodology to uncovering knowledge on traveling behavior of Italians during COVID-19. Okay,
so just have a slight reminder for some of the members. So if you have any questions that would you like to ask, just put it on the chat box. Then later we can have the discussion later. Okay, thank you, Doctor. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you so much. If I could take the possibility to ask you kindly how many minutes I still miss to end.
Okay. Doctor, you still have about 15 minutes.
Okay, that's good.
All right, sure.
Totally on time.
All right, sure.
Okay, so the rationale behind was almost the same. In this case, it was a demand-side study, and this paper was published in the Italian Journal of Marketing. So, all this said again, summarizing the practice that I was sharing with you through my personal experience in applying the theory of explanatory research, if I should and would like to share some theoretical insights on when to use convergent design, it could be when you have limited time and resources for collecting data, and you must collect qualitative and quantitative in just one visit to the field or in the workshop. So if you do not have time, as it was for me with the hotel-related research, to conduct in-depth interview, what you could do is to administer a survey in where people are invited to provide answers to open-ended questions, and then you could manage the narratives from the open-ended questions to first compare the data with those coming from the quantitative study. Or when the context you are studying is extremely dynamic or a completely new research area, so you are struggling in understanding how to cope with this turbulent period of time, you have a feeling that the qualitative and the quantitative data has equal importance in interpreting the problem that you are targeting or that you are trying to understand. When you have the skills to analyze the both strands of research, because what I was giving for granted, which is not in the practice, is that of course, to apply mixed method, you need to be able to make analysis on the both trend of research, unless you take on board researchers that are expert in one or the other methodology. And when the researcher is able to manage extensive data collection and analysis. Mixed methods are for sure time consuming and are more complex than any other study that are applying just one strand of research, as you have probably understood. When we talk about convergent parallel design, we need to acknowledge the fact that we can have three subvariants. The one I was using in my paper that I was sharing is the so-called data validation variant, the one at the bottom part of the slide. So basically, you conduct the data collection and you include both closed and open-ended questions in the same survey. And the results from the open-ended questions are used to confirm and validate the results from the closed-ended questions. So basically, you run just one data collection and you transform the qualitative data in data that can be measured and compared with the quantitative one. The other one is the parallel database variant, where the researcher conduct two different types of data collection. So you have two data sets, and then you merge them to understand how they relate to each other, what they confirm, what they disconfirm, if they relate or somehow diverge. And these kind of arguments about what is confirmed, what is diverging, what is converging, is going to be becoming the final conclusion of your study. And then we have the so-called data transformation variant, where the researchers give priority on the quantitative strand, which means that the researcher transforms qualitative data into quantitative data, so that by doing this transformed qualitative data in quantitative data can be combined with another data set of quantitative data. So, for example, you analyze the narratives coming from online comments review, you transform them in frequencies, and then you use it to run a model on a sample of data that you have collected in a separate data collection by conducting a quantitative analysis. So you have a qualitative data, you do want to compare with quantitative one, so you first transform words or qualitative data in quantitative data. As I was saying to you before, qualitative studies can be many. So I'm now talking mostly, I'm fully realizing mostly about content analysis, narratives, but we have also pictorial analysis, video analysis. There are still, again, qualitative study approach that could be included in a mixed method approach, okay? And the last one, I'm approaching the end of my speech, so we can have full time to discuss if any of you is interested or curious to share opinion, comments, or curiosities. The last one is named as explanatory sequential design. So again, we are facing a sequential design. So for sure, one strand of research is preceding the other one. Given that in this case we are aiming at explaining things, it is quite easy to understand that to explain things, basically we use qualitative data to explain quantitative data. So basically, in the explanatory sequential design, you start by conducting the quantitative studies. You have your findings, and in order to explain, interpret what the statistics are offering you, you conduct a second strand of research, purely qualitative in nature, that is used to help yourself in explaining the findings of the statistics, rather than speculating by yourself on why certain things are occurring. You give voice to participants to explain what the participants, by giving you numbers, somehow had in mind, okay? So in this case, again, we have two distinct but interactive phases, with the quantitative one preceding the qualitative one, and the qualitative one is used to explain the findings of the quantitative strand of research. In this case, you see one example about this methodology. To be honest, this is the used mixed method approach, as far as I know, in existing literature in tourism and hospitality. And this paper has been co-authored by Meran, Olia, Han, and Kapuscinski. I know Olia quite well. And he was applying this kind of methodology to dig in knowledge about canal boat tour participants' behavior. So rather than pretending to explain by their self, I mean the authors and co-authors, what the findings from the statistics was telling to them, what they did was to conduct quantitative studies, followed by in-depth interview to be used to explain the findings of the quantitative studies. So if you, with due time, if you do want to search for all these papers, and I'm more than happy to share my slides with the Southeast Academy, so that you can have with this information with you, and you read the full paper, because I don't have time to explain you, but what is challenging sometimes is to understand how to shape a paper that using these or the other one types of mixed method. So for sure, for example, when you apply an explanatory sequential design, when you deliver the findings from the statistics, what you do is to delivering the findings, interpreting them based and referring to previous literature, and using, by including in the paper, some quotes from the in-depth interview that justify the way you are explaining the findings. So it's not just you explaining the findings, relying on existing literature, it's you doing this through the voice of participants, and you provide the reader evidences of this because you include quotes from the narratives in the paper. Okay. So when we adopt this kind of methodology, well, I would tend to say when the researcher and the research problem are mostly quantitative oriented. So to be clear, the type of mixed method approach that you will be mostly using, or you probably already used in the past, the first type of methods depends on your main background. So at the beginning of my academic career, I was mostly qualitative driven, and all the time I was ending a publication, I was always writing something. Despite the richness of the data, we cannot generalize our findings. At a certain point, I was somehow unsatisfied about this, especially when I was talking with the industry, because people in the industry want to know how much your findings can be generalized to the overall population of consumers. So I said, okay, I need to find a way to overcome this problem. And then I was approaching mixed method through touching quantitative methods, giving priority to qualitative strand of research because it was my background. If among some of you are mostly quantitative driven research, because maybe you are good in econometric analysis, SEM analysis, or experiment or whatever, probably the best part by which you approach this methodology is by using explanatory, because in this case what you could do when compared to the past is starting to seek for qualitative data to interpret your quantitative findings, because all the time you try to do that by yourself, you suffer the ability to feel like self-confident about what you type and you write. And then, of course, this can be done when you know the variables to be investigated. And so, you know the scale, there is no need to explore anything because everything is understood. you have the possibility to return to participants that were eventually taking part to the quantitative strand of research to collect data from them. Because sometimes, if I can jump to the following slides, and then I will come back for a while, you can basically, if you want to explain the findings, you need to first be sure that the people that you will be interviewing were also involved in the previous studies, in some sense. The other sub-variant of explanatory design is the so-called participant selection variant, which means that you give priority to quantitative studies. So you start by quantitative study to identify if the best participants to be involved in the qualitative study. So think about once in a research paper, I was interested in investigating the apathetic behavior of residents to be involved in tourist planning.
Excuse me, Doctor, there's still 2 more minutes.
I'm just ending the speech. I'm just ending. This is the last slide. So it is not such easy to understand when a person can be understood as being apathetic. So what I did was to use some scales coming from the psychology that are used to measure how much a person is apathetic in general in the behavior. And then once I had the possibility to measure the answer on each participant, I was selecting and picking the person to be involved. Of course, I was informing them at the very beginning of the research project that I was not retaining their anonymity, because otherwise I do not have any chance to link the numbers with a certain individual that should be involved in the qualitative strand of research. So the quantitative one, the participant selection criteria, is used to identify the participants that need to be included in the qualitative studies. And then we have the traditional follow-up explanation variant, where the qualitative strand of research is just used to explain the quantitative results. Yeah, I've done. Thanks for your attention. I hope I was not over-rushing.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Giacomo, for your presentation. I would say it's a very in-depth analysis of the rationale for mixed methods research.